Fano, 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 tecuso sinegud, geberi lindena, lefte gadai, fano demek.
Our guest here today is Professor Jonas, historian at the University of Washington, Director and Program Coordinator, Mr. Asaya Bune, young Gabriel Alamayo, and Rai, Prof. Asaye, and I am Solomon Waldias. Nice to meet you, Professor. My first question, and we follow gradually. Okay, my first question is, what motivates you to talk about the Battle of Adwa at this particular time?
Well, this is, historians like to feel that they choose their topics, but I've always felt that this was a topic that chose me. And the moment is one that I recall vividly. It was a moment when I was in a museum in Boston, and I happened to see a photograph of an African American. It was an aesthetically pleasing portrait. And the title of the photograph was Menelik, Victor over the Italians at Adwa. Now, when I was in graduate school at Berkeley, I did Italian history as one of my fields, and I knew about the Battle of Adwa. What I hadn't thought about was how the story of Adwa, of an African army defeating a European army, of a black army defeating a white army, would play out in this country, in the United States, at that very particular moment of the 1890s, which is when the impact of emancipation was still being sorted out in terms of law and in terms of social and cultural relations. That's what that photograph was about, as I saw it. It was a photograph where the photographer is really meditating on the significance of Adwa for an American audience. So it was a very powerful moment for me, and partly because I knew that it couldn't be an Ethiopian American in the photograph. It was an African American who'd been here for some time. And in fact, in some ways, it was a ridiculous portrait because there was nothing about him that looked Ethiopian. But I knew that I had the sense that the photographer had something important to say with that photograph. And by the time I walked from the museum back to my hotel, I was thinking about the book. That is, thinking about how this story could be told, first of all, as a story of Ethiopia and Italy, and especially if Ethiopia's successful defense of its independence, its defense of its freedom, but also the larger impact of Adwa, in a way the global impact of Adwa, and especially the impact of Adwa in the United States, where this obviously had such a powerful effect. So this was back in 2001. The story of Adwa has been my obsession, you could say.
Interesting.
From that moment on. Interesting.
Okay, I have my second question. As a historian, what makes this battle unique? I mean, in your opinion?
So it's unique in a number of ways. I think if you put it in the context of European expansion, remember my earliest work is in European history. If you put the Battle of Adwa in the context of the expansion of Europe, it is the great exception, because in the 19th century, the story of European expansion into Africa is a story of European success and of African defeat.
That's right.
And so much so that even you can read this in European newspapers, you can read this in American newspapers. There is simply the sense that what is happening in Africa is inevitable. And you can read African Americans from this period. And one of the things I wanted to do was to understand both how African Americans and how European Americans responded to Adwa. And so I looked for traces of what African Americans were saying. And from this period, writes in pretty much the same way, that the conquest of Africa is inevitable. And then, 1st of March, 1896,
There we come.
there's this
Adwa.
event that says, no, it's not inevitable.
Very interesting.
It's not inevitable. And I think that this was, so the impact is incalculable. It really changes, utterly changes the impression that people have about how history is going to unfold on the African continent. And Adwa is exactly where those ideas begin to change. I think, so in terms of the Italian strategy, very quickly, what the Italians were trying to do, and what the Ethiopians understood quite clearly that they were doing, is moving up from the Red Sea at Massawa, which has a very difficult climate, particularly for Europeans.
That's true.
And they move up into what are now the Eritrean highlands, the area around Asmara, as a way, and they make this very clear in their dealings with Menelik and Johannes, that this is something that they're doing in order to find a more salubrious, a more comfortable climate. But what happens later, well, what happens first of all is that Mangasha, Ras Mangasha in Tigray, is,
Son
of course,
Johannes,
he's the son of Johannes.
Johannes, yeah.
He sees himself as the natural successor to Johannes. Menelik denies him that, but he still has his authority as Ras Mangasha, as the leader of Tigray. And he resists the Italian move up, as Ras Alula had done before him. And when what happens is that the Italians get some very easy victories early on. Now, there's some early setbacks too, but I'm accelerating the story here a little bit. And it's in 1895 that the Italians, under Oreste Baratieri, their commander, they defeat Mangasha, and Mangasha retreats southward. In fact, he retreats all the way to Shoa.
That's right.
And he retreats southward. And as he retreats, the Italians move in rapidly and occupy significant portions of Tigray. And it looks like a devastating triumph. I mean, it looks like Baratieri has done the impossible. And in Italy, he goes back to Italy in the summer of 95, and he's treated as a hero.
That's true. That's true.
And what he doesn't understand is, quite clearly, is that he doesn't have the forces to control that territory. That what Mangasha has done is simply to move back out of the way. He knows he can't.
Tactical retreat.
It's a tactical retreat.
Yeah.
And Baratieri doesn't realize that, in a way, that he has been suckered. He has been lured into a situation where he can be defeated piecemeal. And so, a place called Enda Jesus,
Enda Jesus, yeah.
at Mekele, and there they lay siege to a fortified position that the Italians hold. The commander there, a man named Galliano, has to. I mean, the Ethiopians suffer some serious defeats there. Makonen's troops, in particular, suffer some significant defeats. But they lay siege, and after a month, Galliano has to surrender. And then Menelik does something really, really smart. He decides he's not going to march on Baratieri, who's at Adigrat, who has a fortified position. He has artillery. He has lots of men. Menelik does something really smart. He decides, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to attack you in your strong position. And he begins to march to the northwest in a movement that's going to threaten Eritrea. And so he moves to the northwest, bypassing Adigrat, and that forces Baratieri to think, I have to defend Eritrea, because if I let him go, he'll cut me off, and he will reach Asmara. And so he's forced out of Adigrat. He's forced to pursue Menelik up to, eventually, Adwa. And that's where the conflict takes place. So I think really this is a battle that Adwa's a battle that's won when Menelik moves to the northwest and lures Baratieri out of Adigrat. At that point, I think the outcome is almost inevitable.
Yeah, that'll be great. We just had our 111th anniversary. We had a good show, basically, with like everything cultural and everything. So we hope you can join us in the 112th one.
I'd be delighted.
Yeah, and also I think there's many Ethiopians and other African Americans who come to America in the Seattle area. Just, in the Seattle area, there's about 30,000 Ethiopians, and many of them have this great mind, but, they either can't afford college or some other things, and we would like, to one day have some kind of connection with the University of Washington. It's great African American studies and international studies, and we hope to work on you with that. And
that would be wonderful. It's a field that, as we were just discussing, it's a field that's still young. There's a huge amount of potential. The history department here has just, in the last 10 years, has hired an African historian, Lynn Thomas. She's very good. We have other Africanists in other parts of the university in art history and anthropology. And so I think we're beginning to see a momentum now in favor of getting African studies going on the University of Washington campus and getting the kind of representation and attention that we'd all like to see.
that's good.
Okay, yeah.
But do you think that in your book maybe you would also write about different parts of history? I know that most of it will be about Ottawa, but do you think you'll write about other situations that happened during the time that wasn't related to it, so you could just basically write about the specific time?
Well, why are you interested in Ethiopia? So I'm going to look at that too. I'm reading what the kinds of messages that Menelik was trying to get out, but also how those messages were received, especially by the Pope in Rome, because the Italians, of course, are Catholic. The Pope is an important leader for many Italians. So I'm reading the Italian press and even the Vatican press to try to bring that part of the story out too. So what I'm trying to do is to write chapters that each touch on some of these other issues, give you enough of the flavor of these issues to make it interesting to the reader, but not so much detail that it's heavy and unreadable.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Do you have any message to the Ethiopian youths here that are not born in Ethiopia and they're trying to learn their ancestral language, history, and culture?
I think one of the things that's interesting about people growing up in America is that they so easily lose track of where they came from. And I can tell you that my own family came to the States. Some of them came from England and some came from Germany in the late 19th and early 20th century. And they obviously they came here because they were unhappy where they were. It was difficult. And one natural reaction to that was that they wanted nothing to do with where they came from. They closed themselves off from their families back there, and they built a new life here. And one of the sad things of that is that they have later generations have no connections with the old country, no connections with the culture, the language. And there's a good side to that in a way. We're comfortable, we're happy. On the other hand, there's a sense that we're missing something, that there are important family relationships that we've missed, important cultural ties. I think present generations of Americans, people who've come more recently, are a lot better at staying in touch. Partly that's technology. It's easier you can fly, you don't have to take a boat. You have the internet and telephone to stay in touch. And I think that that's all good. So, my advice would be to take advantage of that, stay in touch if you can, go back if you can. Those are important relationships to cultivate and to develop for you and for your children. These are wonderful things to have and to hold on to and to pass on.
Great. Again, Professor Jonas is a professor of history at the University of Washington. We have a good conversation. Thank you so much, and we appreciate. We'll come to see you again. Thank you.
Fano, 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 ተኩሶ ሲነጉድ የፍሪ ልምደኛ ለፊት ተጋዳይ ፋኖ እንደመጋኛ ኧረ ተው በሉት ያምባል ሁሉ ሰጠው ለነፋስ አንጓሉ 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 እንደ ቆላ ወፍ እንደ ግሪሳ እንደ ወፍ እንደ ግሪሳ ያረፈው ልቤ ደሞ ተነሳ ደሞ ተነሳ ፋኖ 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 ግራር ተልጦ ደሞ አይላትም ቁርጣሽን እንደ ውሃት ፋኖ ፋኖ ሀረር ለውጋዴ